we are discussing the fundamental concepts, wherein we have discussed the continuum hypothesis, the two approaches for describing fluid flow, namely Euler and Lagrangian. And the last lecture we discussed about the substantial derivative, a derivative characteristic of continuum mechanics and transport phenomena. And we also looked at in detail the physical significance of that derivative, which is following the fluid motion. And in this lecture we are going to discuss about visualization of flow patterns before looking at two other topics as part of fundamental concepts. Okay. We have been telling about flow through some geometry, flow through some pipe, etc. And then, but how do you represent that, either experimentally or in terms of simulation? That is what we mean by visualization of flow patterns. We have some equipment and there is some flow through that, and you want to describe that in terms of some let us say a representation of a figure, then how do you do that? So, there are three different ways of representing a flow pattern. First is a method by streamlines, and streamlines are representation of a result of a simulation. We do not measure streamlines. If you have done a, if you have calculated flow field, if you have predicted flow field, by this time you are familiar with the word flow field, then we can represent the flow field in terms of streamlines. That is why in bracket it says calculated through simulation. Now, second way of visualizing flow patterns is by path lines, and these are path lines are measured in an experiment. You can measure path lines. You can also represent simulation through path lines, but moment you say path lines, we usually relate to an experiment, experimental measurement. And the third method is through streak lines. Once again it is measured in experiment. We do not usually represent result of a simulation through streak lines. Usually we represent mostly by streamlines, maybe path lines also, streak lines rarely. That is why I separated into simulation and experiment, streamlines through simulation, path lines through experiment, which means we measure path lines in an experiment, also represent simulation results through path lines. Streak lines are predominantly measured experimentally. Now, let us start with this definition of a streamline. The whole idea of this lecture is to define all these lines and how are we going to calculate these three lines and then represent pictorially. So, let us look at the definition of a streamline. A streamline is a curve that is everywhere tangent to the instantaneous local velocity vector. Now, first the keywords here are, it is a tangent, next keyword is instantaneous, next keyword is local velocity. So, three aspects are there in this definition. First it says that it is a curve that is everywhere tangent to the velocity vector. Looking at the other way, if you have a streamline and if you draw a tangent, that would represent the velocity. Okay. Now, why is it local? Wherever you have a tangent, it represents velocity at that particular location. So, what is shown here is a streamline here, and I have taken a point x comma y, I have shown a tangent here. So, according to the definition of streamline, a streamline is a curve that is everywhere tangent to the velocity vector. So, at this point this tangent represents the direction of velocity. That is why a velocity vector is also shown here, and that is along the direction of the tangent. Okay. That completes the first part of the first keyword. Second, as I told you, local. Why is it local? Because the streamline can be curved as shown here. So, the tangent which you draw can keep changing directions. So, this tangent gives a velocity at this location, this tangent gives a velocity at this location. That is why this is a local velocity vector. Thirdly, instantaneous. What does that mean? At that particular instant of time, this is the streamline. So, you have a streamline let us say at some instant t, some other let us say at first second, this is a streamline, some other time streamline may be different. So, that is why you when streamlines are instantaneous at a particular instant of time. I think this should be kept in mind, the way in which time plays a role among these three visualization patterns is slightly different. So, for streamlines it is instantaneous streamlines, and if you are given a set of streamlines, just by drawing the tangent you will be able to represent the velocity vectors, and they are local velocity vectors. Now, how are we going to quantify this? Okay, we have seen in terms of description what a streamline is. Let us see how do we go about getting a expression for a streamline. Okay, what is given to us? A velocity field is given to us. As I told you, we have done some simulation, we have done some prediction, we have got the velocity field as a result of that simulation, which means that I know the velocity vector, and for the present case we will restrict ourselves to 2 dimensional case. So, that I have Vx and Vy, 2 components are there and they could be functions of x comma y, and this result is obtained from a simulation. Now, I want to represent this in terms of streamlines. What is the idea? So, that quickly I know how does the velocity change, how does the velocity change from one location to the other, etc. Okay. So, as I told you, we start with the given velocity field represented in terms of expression, the v vector is equal to the Vx with x component of velocity and Vy the y component of velocity, and I and j are the unit vectors along x and y direction. Now, we are looking at the streamline in the x y plane, the coordinate axis is shown here. So, x direction and y direction here, and we are interested in the streamline in the x y plane. Now, what we will do is use the definition of streamline and put in terms of an equation here. What does the definition say? If you draw a tangent to the streamline that is in the same direction as the velocity vector. So, the slope of the streamline at a particular point is given by the tangent. So, we know that the slope of a curve is given by dy by dx. What is specified is along a streamline. We are along a streamline, we draw a tangent and the slope of that is represented by dy by dx. Okay. And now, this should be equal to this velocity vector makes an angle let us say theta with the x axis, and the tangent of that angle should be equal to this slope, and we know that tangent of this angle is given by Vy by Vx. Okay. So, this equation is the condition for a streamline. We equated the left hand side, what we have is the slope of the streamline, and we have defined a streamline such that if you draw a tangent which is a slope will be equal to the tangent of the angle the velocity vector makes with the x axis, which is given by Vy by Vx. Okay. Other way of looking at this expression is that little more geometrically. I have drawn a small incremental arc here, and as the point become closer and closer, this becomes a tangent, okay, and the components of this vector are dy in the y direction, dx in the x direction. So, this is dy and this is dx. Now, we know that the velocity vector is along the same tangent and the components of velocity are Vy and then Vx. So, we can take two similar triangles and equate dy by dx on the left hand side, and then the other triangle is here and equate V by Vx to the dy by dx. So, second one is more geometric, first one is just comes from the definition of streamline. Now, if you extend this to 3 dimensional case, what we have is these conditions. So, what I have shown here is rearranged this, I have written dx by Vx and dy by Vy. So, dx by Vx is equal to dy by Vy, and if you extend to the 3 dimensional case, you have dz by vz. So, these conditions can be used to obtain the equation for streamline. How do we do that? We will see later, but right now we have come from a physical definition to a mathematical expression which represents the physical definition. We will have to integrate this. We will consider only 2-dimensional case later on as an example. So, integration of this equation will give the equation for streamline. And how do we do that? We will see, take an example later on and then discuss that. Okay. Streamline represents the velocity field at an instant. I want to emphasize that it is at a particular instant. Streamlines can change as a function of time, and if you are given set of streamlines, then you keep drawing tangent. For example, we have what is shown here are set of streamlines for flow around a circular cylinder. You have a circular cylinder here. Okay. What you see is just a front view, and you have flow entering here and then flowing over the cylinder. Okay. So, all these are streamlines, and if you draw tangent anywhere, you get the entire velocity field. That is what this statement tells you. Streamline represents velocity field at an instant. So, wherever you have can draw a tangent, then it will represent the velocity vector at all those locations. So, you can get the entire velocity field. As usual, as I said earlier, why is it instant? This velocity field can change with time, and then you get instantaneous velocity field. So, in that way it is very a powerful representation of the velocity field. Moment you look at the streamlines, you know that, for example, flow is coming here, it is taking a small diversion and then coming back again, etc. Okay. And okay, for unsteady flows, streamlines change with time, we have seen that. Okay. And regions of recirculating flow and separation of fluid of a solid are easily identified by the streamline. That is what in fact it is shown here. There is a these streamlines go around the object, and then you see some streamlines here which are closed, which represents circulation. And you can also see that the width of the circulation keeps increasing. So, in that way streamlines are very powerful representation. They give the velocity field, they also tell you recirculating flow, separation of fluid of a solid wall, etc. all can be obtained. You get a quick picture of how the velocity takes place, and that is why we said visualization of flow patterns. As I told you, in this case it is flow over an object, it could be flow through a pipe, whatever geometry, and streamlines visually give a quick representation of the entire flow field. So, to explain our title, these are the flow patterns, and we have seen one method of representing the flow patterns, namely streamlines. Okay. What are these path line? Let us look at the definition once again. A path line is the actual path travelled by an individual fluid particle over some time period. Okay. Now, we are familiar with the term fluid particle. Okay. If you identify a fluid particle as usual by adding a dye, and then you track the path followed by the fluid particle, and that is called a path line. Path line is the actual path travelled by an individual fluid particle. I want to emphasize individual fluid particle, it will help you to understand later on when you discuss streak line. So, path lines are for individual fluid particle. Also want to emphasize that over some time period, that is very obvious. Let us say at t equal t start you are here, after some time the particle is here, the particle is here. So, over some time period what is the path followed by the fluid particle, and what does the path depend on? That depends on the local velocity field. So, once again it represents the velocity field. The whole idea, as I told you, is to represent the velocity field in some form. Earlier we have discussed streamlines, now we are discussing path line. The path, this path depends on the velocity field, which could be a function of time as well. Okay. So, as I told you, mark a fluid particle with dye, and take a video. Why should you take a video? Because we are following the particle over a period of time, continuously over a period of time. I want to emphasize this video, which you will of course easily remember, so that I can contrast it with streak lines little later. Okay. So, two things to be noted, one of course the path of a fluid particle, want to emphasize on individual fluid particle and taking a video. Keep this in mind as we go along to streak lines. I will contrast with this. Okay. Yeah, path line is a Lagrangian concept. By the way, I have discussed, should be very clear that it is a Lagrangian concept. When we discussed Lagrangian concept, in fact, without using the term path line, what did we say? We identify a particle, follow the path followed by a fluid particle. Specifically, I did not use the word path line because it was reserved for today's lecture, but without using this terminology, we said we take a group of molecules, large enough number of molecules, dye it and follow the path followed by the fluid particle. In fact, Lagrangian concept was introduced using path line without mentioning the name. Now, time has come to relate these two. Path line is a Lagrangian concept. Okay. Now, material position vector as a function of time for a chosen particle identified by its initial position. Okay. Once again, all these terminologies refer to Lagrangian description. Let us see how is that. First of all, for a chosen fluid particle, I mentioned as particle means fluid particle, and then material position vector. Why material position vector? We are following a material particle which is a fluid particle, and what is its position as a function of time? It could be it could move in one direction, could move in xy axis or along xyz coordinate. So, it is a position vector, of course, as a function of time, which varies a function of time. Now, the last point is which I have seen earlier, identify its initial position. Remember, in Lagrangian description we said the independent variables are time, of course, and then the fluid particle, a fluid particle. For example, in the chimney case we said particle A, particle B, and then later on we refined saying that we can't number all the particles or give letters for all the particles, we will identify by its initial position. That is what this is, identify by its initial position. Okay. So, different ways of explaining the path line, so that we relate to the Lagrangian concept. This is the definition, but what we have done here, this how we measure. What we have done here is we have related that to the Lagrangian description. Okay. Material position vector as a function of time for a chosen particle identified by its initial position. Okay. So, as I told you, streamlines depend on the velocity field. Similarly, path lines of course also depend on the velocity field. The whole idea is to represent the velocity field. So, for a known velocity field, two ways of looking at it. When I say known velocity field, the velocity field could come from a simulation and we want to represent as path lines, but more practically you have a region and there is a velocity field and the path line gets determined by the velocity field existing in that region. You have a pipe and there is some velocity field here, the path line gets determined by the velocity field. So, when I say known velocity field, either an experimental field and you are measuring a path line, or a velocity field which you calculate from a simulation, and what you require is the velocity field. In one case you have values or functions, in case of simulation. In experiment, this region has some velocity field in it and which you do not know, and but you are measuring the path line to indirectly get the velocity field. Okay. Now, how do you get the path line? It is a simple integration. Here we should mention that based on my description, this path line is same as the path line which you have come across in your particle mechanics course. Whatever you have come across in a physics course, the distance travelled by a particle at different times, exactly same meaning here, but for a fluid particle, that is all the difference. Okay. So, now how do you do that? We want the position vector as a function of time. We are given at t start what is the position vector, and then you are integrating from t start to t end. What is the t end? Let us say t start is 0 here. I want, if I take t end equal to 1, I will get the position vector at the first second. If I take t end equal to 2, I will get the position vector at the second. So, I want to emphasize here once again, you are given x start, you are given t start, you are identifying the particle by its initial position. So, let us say t start equal to 0 and x start is some 1 comma 1 or some coordinate system. This t end keeps changing depending on the position you want to find out to the corresponding time. What is it you are integrating? You are integrating the velocity vector. Okay. Of course, the vectorial equation we write this into 3 components, write as 3 components and do the integration. We will see how do we do that in the application part. Integration for the same particle with different time t end to get one path line for a particle. Every word is important here. For the same particle. Why is it important? To distinguish this from streak lines. That is why I say it is important. For the same particle with different time t end, so that we get different positions at different times and get one path line for a particle. We are focusing on only one particle. You may focus on different particles. By focusing on one particle, you get one path line. So, as shown here, you are focusing on one particle and getting the path line for one particle. That is why it says for the same particle with different time t n to get one path line for a particle. Okay. So, let us see a demonstration. Our friendly system is here, the flow between 2 parallel plates. We will come across example repeatedly, and as a climax of let us say fluid mechanics course, fluid mechanics part or continuum mechanics part, you will derive this velocity profile ourselves. Until then, we will accept this velocity profile. So, as I told you, we have a region, this is a region between 2 plates and you have flow in this direction, okay, and there is flow only in the x direction, okay, and this region has this velocity field and our path line will represent this velocity field. Now, what I have shown here is different fluid particles, each will give different path lines. Okay. So, this will give one path line, this will give another path line, etc., and they are identified by their initial position. Okay. That is what we said, we identify particle by initial position. Let us say this is t equal to 0. Let me start the simulation. Now, these individuals are the individual lines are the path lines. This is the path line for this particle, path line for this particle, path line at the particle which was the center, path line here and path line here. Okay. Now, as you see, this particle has travelled only a smaller distance, this particle at the center has travelled a longer distance. Obviously, the velocity here is smaller, the velocity here has a larger value. So, this particle has travelled a larger distance, all are done for the same time. So, as once again going back to the objective, we want to represent the flow field in terms of path line. That is what has happened here. These path lines represent the velocity field. A particle here moves slower, a particle here moves faster, and that is why it has travelled a longer distance compared to a particle which is closer to the wall. Now, how does it compare with the streamline? Okay. Remember the mathematical representation of streamline. We said dy by dx along a streamline is equal to Vy by Vx. In this particular case, there is no flow in this direction, there is flow only in the x direction. So, the y component of velocity is 0, which means that this slope is 0. When the slope is 0, we know it is just a straight line, horizontal line, and streamline is y equal to constant. So, the path line is also a straight line, streamline is also a horizontal line, path line is also horizontal line, streamline is also horizontal line. So, path lines and the streamlines coincide with each other, not any path line, any streamline passing through this location and path line through that location coincide. Similarly, streamline passing through this location and path line passing through that location coincide. You cannot say this path line coincide with this streamline and so on, okay, that is not correct. Okay. So, now this is the case of a steady state velocity field. This velocity field does not change with time, hence streamlines coincide with path line.